Chapter-2. Kaitlyn took a deep breath. Margie Fields was here. She needed this job. She would be professional. Pulling her shoulders back, she stood and smoothed her olive green pencil skirt. It had taken her twice as long to get ready this morning, knowing Margie was coming today. But Kaitlyn thought the cream silk shirt and olive skirt worked. "Hi, Margie. It's so good to see you again." Kaitlyn pasted on her professional face as she greeted the wealthy older woman, but her heart was hammering in her chest. How long had it been since she'd seen Dillon's mother? Probably around the time she and Dillon went their separate ways. "It's good to see you too, dear." Margie stepped forward as if to hug her, then paused and extended her hand instead. Kaitlyn shook it, glad the woman hadn't continued going for the hug. It had been too long. Margie's gray hair was pulled up in an immaculate updo, and her tailored pantsuit showed off her thin figure. Her hair had turned gray when Kaitlyn and Dillon were in high school, but somehow she managed to pull it off and look distinguished rather than just old. Kaitlyn, on the other hand, had to see her stylist once a month to keep her gray hairs covered up. She didn't have many, but they stuck out in her dark hair like icicles on a Christmas tree. "Come into my conference room. I threw some ideas together after your email." Margie's email had come just hours after they had spoken on the phone, and Kaitlyn had spent the next few days whipping up designs before this meeting. Kaitlyn led the older woman past Melody's watchful eye and into the small conference room. The office space wasn't very big. It held Melody's desk, Kaitlyn's office, the conference room, a small kitchen, and an even smaller bathroom. But it worked for now. "So, keeping your rustic theme in mind, I came up with 3 options for you, and of course, if you don't like any of them, I can make additional changes." "I'm sure one of them will be fine," Margie said, as she pulled out a chair and sat down. She folded her hands in her lap and looked up at the screen as she waited for Kaitlyn to begin. Kaitlyn nodded, trying to calm her nerves. She clicked on the big screen that took up one wall in the room and opened her laptop before sitting next to Margie. The first picture filled the screen. It had the room decorated in dark browns and creams. A large brick fireplace held the focus in the main room, underneath a large mounted deer head. The couches were brown leather, and the Christmas tree was a large brick fireplace held the focus in the main room, underneath a mounted deer head. The couches were brown leather, and the immense Christmas tree was lit with white lights. Margie tilted her head as she regarded the pictures. "It's beautiful, but maybe a little too rustic. Women tend to be our biggest clientele, and I can't imagine the animal head would be a big seller." Kaitlyn issued a nervous giggle and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Of course, we could easily remove that, but let me show you what else we have." She clicked the next button on her laptop, and pictures of the room done in mauves and pale pinks filled the screen. An abstract painting replaced the mounted head. The tree in this one was flocked white with pink lights. This one was less rustic, but Kaitlyn had thrown it in because sometimes people said they wanted one thing, but really wanted something different when they saw it. That was not Margie, though, as her forehead wrinkled slightly. "Again, lovely, but not exactly what I had in mind." "Don't worry, I saved the best for last," Kaitlyn said, as she clicked the next button. She held her breath, but was pleased when Margie's eyes lit up. For this one, she had decorated the room in hunter green and red, traditional Christmas colors. Red and green striped pillows completed the beige-colored couches, and a beautiful landscape painting hung on the wall. White lights hung from the crown molding, and the tree was large and decorated with multicolored lights. "Now this I love," Margie said. "It feels like home, and I love the wallpaper. I'm not normally a wallpaper fan, but only because I hate removing it." Kaitlyn smiled. Removing old wallpaper was one of her least favorite things, too. But a good wallpaper really brought life to a room. "Wonderful. Is there anything you want to change?" Margie scanned the pictures again before shaking her head. "No, everything looks wonderful. How long do you think it will take?" "Well, it depends on how much I have to take down and clear out. But once that is done, I think a week will be enough. I'm going to have to hire a crew, though. Melody and I can't possibly do this on our own in that time." "But it will be ready for the picture." Margie's voice was full of hope. "Yeah, if everything goes according to plan, I should be finished by the 22nd. That will give you a day to get prepared." "This is wonderful, Kaitlyn. I knew you would be perfect for this job." Kaitlyn smiled. She was glad Margie had liked the designs, and even more pleased to be working again. Even better, this job would pay the bills for a few months and hopefully lead to more clients. She pulled the contract out of the folder she had brought in and handed it to Margie. "If you want to take a day to look it over, you're welcome to." Margie scoffed and waved her hand in a dismissive gesture. "I don't need that. You are practically family, and I know you are an honest woman. Just give me a second to read over it." Kaitlyn tensed at the words. Practically family. She had once hoped they would be family, as marrying Dillon had been part of her dreams. But he had other plans. She had been hoping he would stay close and they would continue to date through college, but he'd left, stating his need to see the world. However, that was the past. She needed to focus on the present, and that present was Margie, who needed a moment alone. "Of course. Would you like some water or hot tea?" "Tea would be wonderful, thank you." Kaitlyn pushed back her chair and quietly exited the room, pulling the door shut behind her. "Well?" Melody's voice caught her off guard, and Kaitlyn jumped and threw her hand over her heart. How did she approach so quietly? "Melody, you scared me. Don't sneak up on people like that." "Sorry, I'm just really excited to know how it went." Kaitlyn put her finger to her lips and motioned Melody to follow her to the kitchen. "She's looking over the contract right now, but she loved the third design." Melody clapped her hands together and bounced on her toes. Even though she was in her late 20s, Melody looked like a young girl when she got excited. "Ooh, I knew she would. It was my favorite too. So when do we start?" "In 2 days. Do you think you can get the phones forwarded so we can still get calls while we're both working there?" Kaitlyn opened one of the cabinets and took out a mug and a tea bag. Then she filled the mug with hot water from their cooler and dropped the bag in. "Of course." Melody's face clouded in confusion. "Where exactly is this lodge?" "Keystone, so about 90 minutes with no traffic. However, this time of year, I'd bet on 2 to 3 hours to be safe, so I just plan on staying." Kaitlyn laughed at Melody's wide eyes and shocked expression. "You don't have to stay. If you can come down a few times a week, we should still finish in time. I'll hire a crew that can stay at the lodge." "Okay, that I can do. I just can't leave Trixie alone all day, every day. She's finally stopped tearing up everything in sight, but I'm afraid boarding her for 3 weeks would send her into a relapse." Trixie was the yellow lab puppy that Melody had picked up a few weeks after breaking up with her boyfriend. She claimed it was because she was lonely, but Kaitlyn thought it had more to do with her biological clock ticking. A puppy wasn't exactly a baby, but the care involved was pretty close. "You should have crate trained her," Kaitlyn said with a shake of her head. "I know, but she had the saddest face when I put her in there. These big droopy eyes, and I swear her mouth turned into a frown. It was more than I could take." Kaitlyn chuckled. Melody was not only an animal fan, but also a bit of an exaggerator. "You are such a softie." "I know. Hey, wait, what are you going to do with Jack?" "I'm going to take him with me. I figured he could use a vacation as well, and I always loved winter at the lodge. I put the clause in the contract, and speaking of the contract, I better get back in there. Wish me luck." "I will, but you don't need it. You're a natural at this, Kaitlyn." Kaitlyn smiled and walked cautiously back to the conference room. The mug was warm in her hands, but she was careful not to spill it. The last thing she needed was a stain on her shirt or a burn on her hand before a big job. Margie was scanning the last page as she entered. She glanced up and smiled. "Everything appears to be in order." "Oh, I'm so glad." Kaitlyn set the teacup down in front of Margie and held out a pin. "It's just too bad you and Dillon never got together," Margie continued, as she picked up the pin and signed. "Having a decorator in the family would be such a benefit." Dillon's name again. Was Margie going to drop it in every conversation? Didn't she know that Kaitlyn had adored Dillon, but his love must not have been as deep? Kaitlyn's cheeks began to ache from the pasted smile, but she nodded. "I guess we'll just have to hire you for all our jobs. If you do amazing this time, that is." She laid the pen down and picked up the cup. Though she smiled, Kaitlyn wasn't sure if the smile was genuine or a carefully veiled threat. Suddenly, she wondered what she had gotten herself into. Dillon stared at the email from his mother. The lodge back home had been picked to be in the travel magazine winter edition, and his mother was throwing a huge release party for the occasion. He had just been thinking about how much he missed the snow, and Keystone would definitely have some this time of year. He could take a few weeks off and relax there, do some skiing, and maybe take some pictures to get inspired again. He hadn't booked a job in a few weeks, and he knew it was because he wasn't inspired. Plus, he held fond memories of Christmas at the lodge. His mother always decorated to the nines, and she made cookies and bought gifts for all the children who stayed there during the holidays. There were coloring contests and popcorn stringing, and on Christmas Day, his father would dress up as Santa in the morning to hand out the gifts. He glanced over at Shauna, who sat at the vanity she had insisted he buy for his rental house, even though they didn't live together. She was brushing her long blonde hair and carefully counting each stroke. He didn't understand it, but she swore that brushing her hair 100 times a day made it strong and shiny. "Hey, Shauna, what do you think of going to a ski lodge for a few weeks?" "I don't think so." "Why not? You don't have any jobs over Christmas, do you?" Shauna was a model for a swimwear company. She generally stayed busy, but the holidays were much slower. "I don't do rustic lodges in the mountains." She ran the brush through her long blonde hair again. 53. Her gaze never left the mirror. "I don't like being cold, remember?" Dillon rolled his eyes. Shauna was fun in a lot of areas, but she refused to do anything where she might get cold. Pools had to be near hot tub temperature. Beaches were fine, but she rarely went in the water. Skiing was out of the question, as was sledding, building a snowman, or ice skating. It was times like this that he wondered why they were still together. It was no wonder he hadn't been able to pick a ring for her. They were opposites in nearly every way, except for their love of photography. Of course, while he loved taking pictures, she loved having pictures taken of her, but it had kept them going for 6 months now. "It's my family's lodge, Shauna. They're having a big party, and I thought it would be a good chance for you to meet my mom." Plus, it would give him a chance to get his mother's opinion about Shauna. If his mother liked Shauna, then he would know his insecurities were just that. But if she didn't, it would solidify his misgivings about this relationship before he made a massive mistake. The brush paused and her shoulders rose slightly with her inhaled breath. I'm not sure I'm ready to do family yet either, Dillon. Dillon ran a hand through his short, dark hair. What are we doing then, Shauna? She shrugged. Having fun. I'm just not ready for any strings, Dillon. Right, strings. Boy, was he glad he hadn't bought a ring now. He wasn't asking her to marry him, just meet his mother. But just like the cold, Shauna wasn't a fan of anything that felt too personal. Dillon could only imagine how she would have reacted if he had proposed. Well, I'm going anyway. I haven't seen my mother in ages, and Christmas is always huge at the lodge. She put the brush down and turned to face him. You're going to be gone over Christmas? I am. I don't have a pressing job, and I miss my mother. That's why I wanted you to come with me. But maybe instead of a holiday together, what we need is a holiday apart. Shauna sighed. I don't want to break up, Dillon. I just want to go somewhere tropical. Of course she did. She wanted him to take her on another tropical vacation like he had a few months ago. The problem was, he didn't really have the money to keep flying her off to exotic places. His job earned him decent money, but it had been dwindling quickly since meeting Shauna. He couldn't believe he had been thinking of purchasing a ring. It wasn't time to propose. It was time to cut his losses. He stood and crossed to her. I know. It's me breaking it off. I've been trying to figure out where we should go from here for quite some time, and this solidifies it for me. I want someone adventurous, someone who is willing to go places with me and meet my family. Someone like Kaitlyn, he thought to himself. Kaitlyn? He hadn't thought of her in a while. Why was she popping into his head now? It's been fun, Shauna, but I'm looking for more. Her blue eyes turned to ice and narrowed to slits as she regarded him. Then she shrugged and flicked her long hair over her shoulder. Whatever. It's your loss, Dillon. I'll have no trouble finding someone else. Dillon knew that was true. Though he was a good-looking guy, Shauna was a bombshell with her perfect figure, long blonde hair, and blue eyes. He had constantly had to deal with guys hitting on her in front of him the last 6 months, and he could only imagine how many hit on her when he wasn't around. I'm sure you won't, but we just want different things right now. I think this is for the best. She rolled her eyes one more time, grabbed her brush from the vanity, tucked it in her purse, and walked out of his rented house. Dillon sighed as the front door shut. He hadn't planned to spend the holidays alone, but it would be better than spending it with a woman he didn't really love. The question was, would he ever find a woman he loved? Dillon thought back over his last few relationships. He had ended all of them. Shauna was too obsessed with money. Natalie was too athletic. Kara was too quiet. As he replayed the relationships in his head, he realized he had compared every one of them to Kaitlyn. Kaitlyn, his girlfriend from 10 years ago, who, even though she had been the same age as him, she had always seemed a little younger, especially after her mother died. He'd taken her under his wing, and they'd become best friends, and then dated. They'd spent tons of time at the lodge cuddling in front of the fire, and they'd gone to prom together. At one point, he'd even thought they would get married. But then graduation had come. She'd wanted to stay close to home and attend design school, while he'd wanted to see the world. He'd always thought he would come home and they would get together, but it hadn't happened, and he'd forgotten her as time moved on. At least, he thought he'd forgotten her. What if he'd been comparing every woman to Kaitlyn Bell because she had stolen his heart at the age of 17, and he'd never really gotten it back.